All right, good morning. I could talk, I'm going to talk right through the bell, and I hope I get to saying everything I want to say, is because of the fact that I don't go off a script or anything, it's just all in my head, which I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. And I don't look at you a lot because I can still visualize things that I saw. So this is my story, and due to the time constraints here, I'm going to try to go through it rather fast and such like that, okay? On that day, September 11th, 2001, I was a lieutenant in the New York City Police Department. And the way you get promoted in New York City Police Department is through writing tests, okay? It's just a straight test. Whoever's number one gets it and such, and I just had this innate ability to absorb a bunch of useless information and take a test, and then ended up doing pretty well on it, you know. I see Officer Long there smiling at me because he has that ability as well. So, on this day in question, you'll see a picture here. That's the only picture I have of me in police uniform. A lot of the officers down there had pictures of themselves at the location, and that picture is Dr. Iannetti's brother, Tim, who was with the New York City Fire Department on that day as well. So, and the pictures are compliments of Mr. Tim there, so I appreciate that. I show that picture of my family because obviously you can tell that's my wife, and I'm going to be married 24 years. Oh geez, in 3 days, I better put that in my phone before I forget. And this little guy here is my son. Now this picture is the only one I have, and I believe that was, obviously you can tell, St. Patrick's Day 2005. My son is a junior in college now. His name's Tommy. He plays baseball up in New York. And he was born June 29th, 2001. And because of him being born on that day, I didn't make my promotion ceremony at Madison Square Garden, that little rascal. He came into the world and I didn't get to go. And that's my daughter. So she's a senior at the University of Florida right now. So my son here, his class in high school was the last class that would have been alive when this happened. So that's why I thought it was important to have that photograph as well. Okay, so on this day in question, it was a beautiful day, beautiful September day. I was coming to my place at the time in Florida with my wife and 2 babies at the time. My son was 2.5, my daughter, they're 13 months apart, so whatever, she would have been 15 months old or whatever. And I never made it. I still remember the car service person coming, and I put the bags on the driveway, and I came back up into my kitchen, and we had a TV there. And my wife said a plane flew into the Trade Center. New Yorkers used the term Trade Center singular, but actually there were 7 buildings there. The first thing I thought of was in 1945, a US military plane flew into the Empire State Building. And so that's why I thought it was a mistake. You know, things happen in New York, you know. So I subsequently learned from the driver that the airports are shut down. And my reply was, why? You know, I'm selfish. Why? I want to get the heck out of New York and go to Florida, you know. And he said, well, because of the plane flown into the Trade Center. I said, okay. So I sit down in front of the TV with my wife. That picture there is of the first plane coming in. And I had to write this down, I don't know where I just put it, because I always forget the time frame of what it is. But actually, it was at, I'm sorry, the plane hit the North Tower at 8:45 in the morning, right? So 8:45 in the morning, that's when it happens. I get back up into my house, and I'm watching the news with my wife, and then all of a sudden, and I don't know the sequence of pictures here, so forgive me, at 9:03, here comes the second plane. You see right there? Going into the other tower. I see that as I'm watching the local news in New York, and that happened at 9:03. That was the South Tower, okay? Those two buildings were 110 stories high. As you can tell, it soared above the New York City skyline, which if anybody has been to New York, anybody been there by the students, by raise a hand? That's situated at the southernmost part of Manhattan Island. When people say going to New York City, that means they're going to Manhattan most likely. And at the tip of Manhattan is where those buildings were. So every time you go over, like I would go over the George Washington Bridge, which will figure into my story, the world's busiest bridge, and as I look south, I would always admire those buildings because them being 110 stories high, they towered over everything else. Now they have the Freedom Tower there, which when they built it was the largest structure in the world, but now there's another building in Dubai that is larger than that. So when that plane hits that second building, I won't say what I said to my wife. I said, "Oh my goodness," but it was a little bit different words in there. And I still remember saying, "That's not a mistake." Nobody knew of terrorism back in 2001. Years ago, we were able, imagine this, that you'd go to an airport, park your car, take your bags, and go right to the gate. Right? You can't do that anymore. Why? Because of this. Because people hate us and what we stand for. That's their second attempt to try to bring down these buildings. They were successful. In 1993, they tried as well. The same group of individuals. If I slip, I apologize because I still have some distaste in my heart, obviously. They tried 1993, they put a bomb in a truck, went underneath the towers. Underneath there, under those towers were a shopping mall, parking garages, a lot of stuff down there. On the top of it was Windows of the World, which was a restaurant, very, very expensive. So they tried to bring down the towers. They were unsuccessful on that day. So when that happened, I said to my wife, "I have to go to work." She said, "Why? You're on vacation." I said, Not anymore, I'm not on vacation." So I was getting my stuff together, and I got a call to come to work, and I was like, "Yeah, I know I got to come to work," so I left. And back then, I have a terrible memory, but I believe that there was still cell phones at that time, or I had one. So I left my wife and two babies, and I went to work. So as I went to work, I take this highway. I try to be very so you can see things in your head, and you'll see how life changed just like that. Imagine, so I'm driving to work on this highway in the northern suburbs called the Palisades Interstate Parkway. If anyone's ever been up there, it's absolutely beautiful. You drive, it's through the mountains. In September, it was a beautiful morning, the trees, the flowers, and all that kind of good stuff. So all of a sudden, I hit traffic. It stopped. And it's a two-lane road, and then there's a grass median with trees and such, and then on the other side is the parkway going north. I was going south. So all of a sudden, I start seeing these cars driving on the grass. And you don't see that in the northern suburbs. In New York City, you see all kinds of craziness. So what I ended up looking at the car, and I found that there was one similarity amongst all of it, of all the cars. They were all driven by males with one occupant. So as I watched, I saw, finally, it seemed like it was an endless amount of cars. And what I saw is out of this blue sedan, looked like a Toyota Corolla, a uniform shirt in the back passenger seat was kind of flowing with the wind, and I saw the patch turn. It said New York City Fire Department. I said to myself, "Oh, okay, these are slang." I use a lot of slang. These are guys trying to get to work, so what I do, I followed the line. So as I got down there, I was met with some very heavily armed New Jersey State troopers. I'm not into guns. They look like they had these machine guns and helmets like they were going to war, and at the time, obviously, we didn't know what was going on. And I had to show them my identification card, okay? And because of my rank, they used an abbreviation called LOU. And he's like, "Lou, this is what you gotta do. You gotta park your car at the Port Authority Police Headquarters." That's in New Jersey, because I would take the George Washington Bridge, which would go from I lived in New York State, but right on the Jersey border, so I'd go through New Jersey and over the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan. I'd had to park my car there and then take a shuttle bus over the bridge into Manhattan and get off at the George Washington Bridge bus terminal on 178th Street, and I worked on 82nd Street. So I asked him a question. I said, so how do I travel 100 blocks when the trains and the buses are not working? And he wasn't being a wise guy. He said, I don't know what to tell you, Lou. That was what the answers were for everybody when they approached him. I don't know what to tell you. Because you know what? We didn't know what was going on. So long story short, I thank him and I proceed down the highway. And I just told you that I saw all these cars on the grass, right? The rest of the traffic, people who were trying to go to work, the people who were not, now they use the term first responders, they were stuck in traffic. They didn't get to go anywhere. So as I left there, obviously I was exceeding the speed limit greatly, and it was that's when I started, I was very much shocked and awe. All those cars were gone. So as I'm driving down this highway, I'm getting to this bridge, which at that time, argument's sake, I said that was like 9:03, so say I left my house at 9:15, 9:20. There was no cars on the road going north or south except for me. I hit this exit where I get off, and I'm saying to myself, do I do what the officer told me and park my car here, or do I just say, the heck with it and go over the bridge? So I'm sure you know what I did. I said, the heck with it, I went over the bridge. I disregarded what he told me to do. So as I come around this turn, just imagine you're coming around a turn, like a letter C, and I hit the bridge, and I look across the busiest bridge in the United States, and there's nobody going into New York City or outside, leaving New York City, but me, Kevin O'Sullivan, in my car, going to work. So as I go across the bridge and I look south, what do I see at the end of Manhattan Island is this, the fire and the smoke. That stayed over that area for months, because you know why I could say that? Because I made that drive every day. I made that drive every day for 11 years till I retired. And it was very painful to see. I could tell you that I personally spoke to somebody who was in Philadelphia, which is like an hour and a half south of New York City. They went up on the roof and they saw the remnants of that smoke and such. Do you think that's healthy to breathe in? No, figures into my story, okay? So what happens is I get on this other highway, the West Side Highway, with those who've been in New York, it's packed 24/7, nobody on the road. I'm drawing a picture in your head, nobody on the road, right? Except for police and emergency vehicles flying up and down and such like that. I get off the highway, it's like someone hit the switch. People were like, nothing happened. You know, I still remember seeing women pushing baby carriages going to Riverside Park. It's along the Hudson River in Manhattan. The old man with his coffee and his fedora hat and his newspaper under his arm, going to sit on the bench and read his newspaper. And nobody, it was like nothing changed. As I'm going closer to my precinct. That was the 20th precinct I worked at, on 82nd Street between Amsterdam and Columbus Avenue. A block away was the Catholic church, so I stopped there and I just said a quick prayer because I didn't know what the heck was going to happen. And I proceeded to work. I pull into the parking lot, into my parking spot. I go in, I get dressed, and I put on my uniform there without the jacket because it was a nice day. You can see I wore white. You see I had a gold badge surrounded with gold on top. The white shirt signifies management. That figures into my story, okay? So I get dressed, and I'm still a cop in my mind, a very active person. I always was, and I still am. So I get dressed, and I go into my commanding officer's office dressed like that, and I said to him, I don't remember what rank he was at that time. His name was Mike Shea. So I went in, and I said, Inspector, here, I'm going to grab a couple of guys and head down to the Trade Center. He looked at me, he said, no, you're not. And there was something that we shared in common. Maybe you could understand by the last name O'Sullivan and Shea were both stubborn Irishmen, so it was like two guys fighting back and forth. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, you're not. Yes, I am. And then he saw I was getting very, very upset, to put it kindly, and he put his hands up. And he says, I got a job for you, Kevin. And I said, what's that? He says, I want you to take the desk. So what that means is that the person, if you watch police shows, they bring the bad guys into the police station house. They're handcuffed and they stand before this desk. All right, I was a little bit taller, get shorter in age. about 6'1", and I would walk up to the desk and it'd be right here. And then it's raised, as you could tell, and then the sergeant or lieutenant would be sitting behind that because he or she was in charge of the operations of the precinct during that tour of duty. So he wanted me to do that. I wasn't happy with that, because why? I wanted to go down there, but I was prohibited from going down there. Why? Because I wore a white shirt. What does a white shirt signifies? Management. The way you get to that rank is I got to pass a couple of tests. So that figures into my story is that I encourage you, as well as my kids, to do the best that you can and strive for the best in life, but sometimes what comes with advancement is responsibility. So I did my job that day, and I'll tell you what I did that day. Was I there? No. My story starts the next day. But I'm going to tell you what I did on that day. So what happened, I went back into my locker room, got undressed into the proper uniform, and I walk out, and I'm getting on the desk, and I look out into a room that's smaller than this, obviously, and I look and I see it crowded with police officers who I didn't know. So you're saying, well, how could that be? What happened is that police officers couldn't get to work. And because I worked in one of the only the last time in my last assignment in my career, in a desirable place, police officers coming from the northern suburbs who were coming down had to go to work, but they couldn't get to some of the places they work. And those who've been into New York, New Yorkers are kind of savvy. Well, if I'm driving, do I want to go to work in the Bronx? No, you don't want to go to work in the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. It's terrible. It's absolutely horrible. So what happens, and then you go, oh, do I want to stop in a precinct upper Manhattan? No, it's just as bad. So what happens, they end up where I work, which is on the west side of Central Park, or the 19th precinct on the east side. That's why I had all these officers. There's the desk phone, it's ringing, it's ringing, it's ringing. The sergeant was ready to go home. Imagine him, he had kids, he worked midnights, had to go home, take care of his kids, and then this happens. He's ripping his red hair out of his head. Still remember Frank Gannon. So I said to him, Frank, this is all you gotta do. Answer that phone, tell them what they want, and I'll see if I can give them what they want. Because what happens is that on that phone, they call that phone, they know they're gonna get someone who's in charge of that precinct all day. Because don't you think that needed a lot of people down there? Right? Thank goodness, this is going to sound bad, thank goodness this happened in New York City. You know why? Because when you have almost 40,000 police officers and, 10,000 firemen and such, we're very self-sufficient. We have every toy and tool that you would ever want, and that was used during that time frame. So what did I do I'm looking at my watch for that day. This is what I did. I told one of our detectives, who knew everybody, I said, I need dry erase boards. And he looked at me and says, what do you need dry erase boards for, Lou? I said, because I pointed and I said, I'm responsible for all these knuckleheads out here. And cops being cops, they're pretty savvy in this regard. They know if they get their name written down and they get lost, they could do whatever they got to do. They can go home. So what I did is I put some sergeants against the door to prevent people from leaving. And I did something when I got on that desk, and I just told you I looked out and I saw all these people. I did something very unprofessional that day, because I feel, as soon as I got there, I said, nobody's in control here. Now I know why the boss put me in control. I'm a very quiet, easygoing person, but I can get the job done. So when I got on top of the desk, I looked and I stopped and I said, shut up. New York City police officers back in that time don't like to be told, shut up. I said, shut up. And of course, there's always that one. I said, shut up and sit down. And that's always that one, says, I had no chair, where can I sit? And you know where I told him to sit. Put his behind on the ground. So I told them that I'm in charge. So this is what I did from argument's sake. I left my house 20 after 9. Probably got to work 9:45. Behind the desk was an area, it was as long as this, but not as high, obviously. And what I had was dry erase boards going across this whole thing. And this is what I did from 9:45 on September 11th till the sun came up the next day and I was relieved. I did the following. I started here in the left corner, I still remember, I put 1 + 8 = Hudson Street, and I drew a line. And I turned around and I said, Sergeant, you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, get your guys, get out and go to Hudson Street. I still remember him saying, but I'm from the task force, my guys are over there. I said, Sergeant, what did I tell you to do? Just shut up and get out of here. So for that length of time, that whole board was filled with names, because I had this innate ability that when someone would call me and say later on in the day, how many did you send to Hudson Street, O'Sullivan? 1 in 8. It's an abbreviation. 1 in 8 is the span of control in policing, in traditional policing. There's 1 sergeant to 8 police officers. If you wonder, like for me, it'd be 1 lieutenant, 4 sergeants, and 32 officers. So I would have, if I went to something, a street fair and such, so before O'Sullivan would get there, there would have to be whatever, 36 people there before they would assign me there, you know? So that's what I did. That's what I did the whole day. Now, what I have to live with, ask me, do I remember who I assigned? No, I don't know who the heck they were. Did they all make it home that day? Probably not. Did they get hurt that day? Probably. Is that hard for me to have digested? Yes. But the way I rationalize that, and I see Officer Long shaking his head in agreement, is that I did my job that day. But leaving that next morning, I knew the following, that Lieutenant Kevin O'Sullivan was in charge of the night tour, 6 at night to 6 in the morning, for the duration. What that means for the duration is 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in O'Sullivan. We don't know if and when you're going to get a day off. So I already knew what I would do. Now, where I worked was, we were blessed to have all these beautiful restaurants and such like that, that when people come to New York, I'm having technical difficulty here. Oh, it stopped. But they would come to my precinct, essentially, that area to eat. So we had all the good restaurants that people would want to go to and such like that we had the finest food. They were bringing in stuff that was for free and everything, so I didn't have to go home. But what happened, thank you, is I did go home. Why? I didn't, see on the top of that building there, I think that's the South Tower, that antenna, that controlled all the cell phones and television stations, mostly all the television and radio stations in New York. So when that building went down, everything went down. Also with cell phones, they eventually came back up, but they didn't allow them to work. You know why? Because with a cell phone, you can activate what they call an IED, right? That's essentially as a bomb. So that's why they stopped doing that as well. So I went home to see my wife and kids to let them know I was alive. Obviously, my kids were too young to realize that, and I went back to work. So when I went back to work, for the sake of time, being in charge, I get there early, I get my roll calls together, I get the officers where I want them assigned. I pick a driver who was, I deliberately picked because he was the union delegate, which means he can keep his mouth shut. And what happened between him and me, his name is Jerry Clark, I hope he's okay. I gave him the keys to the car, and I tossed him the car, the keys, and I said, wait outside. So after everybody left and everything was in working order, I got into the police car, and I said to him, he said, where to, Lou? And I said, the Trade Center. And he looked at me and he said, something like, are we supposed to do that? And I said, Jerry, who's in charge? And he said, sorry. I got to do it automatically. Oh, okay, that's right. So, and he said, you are. So I said, shut up and drive, and he grinned. So now what happened is that's a good picture here. I'm going to jump around, and I apologize. So I ended up going down there. On this day of September 11th, everybody looked like this. People were walking home. Walking, I mean, they didn't even know where, they were like zombies. Police officers coming back from down there, I saw it look like that. If you look at that picture there, right, it's very hard to depict what their race is, white, black, Hispanic, Asian. They look like the Michelin Man. I hate to use that term, but that's really what it was. We drove down there. We left and drive down there, and it was a beautiful night. Argument's sake, 6:30 at night. So we get down there, to the Trade Center. Did you just hit the? Yeah, if you can just hit. Okay, different things. That officer there, I know her, Maura Smith. She was the only female officer who died that day. I worked with her. And this is people going from Manhattan over the George Washington, over the Brooklyn Bridge. You can just keep flipping, that's fine. So what happened was, we went down there. When we got down there to the location, which was, we were west of the Trade Center, we parked our car in a place called Battery Park City, which I'm just trying to see if Manhattan pops up there. So what it was, on the way down also, this is really strange. Isn't it strange for police cars to stop other police cars? For the sake of time, they were doing that, you know why? Because these terrorists, it was learned, and never get out in the press, a lot of stuff didn't get out in the press. They stole police cars, and it's very easy to get a police uniform. So they would stop the police cars, you know? So, but I told you I wore a white shirt. They didn't stop me because they didn't know if I was a lowly lieutenant or one of the chiefs of police, so they just waving us down. So when we parked and I got down there, you see all this on this middle picture, the air there? You can't see, right? 36 hours later, it was like that. So I got out of the car in Battery Park City, which is a residential community. Every building in Manhattan, when you look up at these skyscrapers, which like down there, they're probably 40-story building, you got a couple of thousand people living in there. So we park the car and I get out, and it's like that, it's like night. It was just 15 minutes ago, you said O'Sullivan, and it was daytime, it was night, you know? So what happened when we get out of the car, the air was, this is where I'm at, it was like off a movie set. The air was so thick you could breathe it. You could taste it. It was like sand, like taking sand at the beach and shoving it up your nose. It was horrible. I looked around, so cars there, everything was pristine, nothing was disturbed. Cars filled with that soot and ash and such like that. As you can see, some of the streets strewn with with the debris on the ground. Like I said, argument's like 36 hours later, papers, it seemed like thousands of papers just flying. And I still remember, I'm gonna steal this one for a second, watching this one piece of paper. I was soaking it in because it was so awe. And I remember watching a piece of paper onto the ground. You know why I did that? That was the only piece out of everything, because I already knew what I was going into. So as we walk across from the Battery Park City heading towards the Trade Center, as I'm walking, I had boots on. All right, this is where I respect that your children, I'm going to paint you a picture, and you could, you know, come out of it, you could decipher what I'm saying without me saying it. So as I'm walking through that, but it was like more, that ash and garbage was higher, up to mid-calf, and I'm walking, and I'm hearing like loud machinery, and it was blinding light, and I'm hearing crunch under my feet, and I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, I look down, you know, and I'm just walking, and then all of a sudden start seeing tents pop up, water, like United Way, they were giving away with that, food, and they were giving away shoes. Doesn't that sound strange, why they give away shoes? Because when you have fire, explosion, creates heat, buildings come down, it burns the rubber right off your shoes. Scorches your feet. So when my feet, the rubber off my shoes get burned, I need another pair of shoes. Here's another pair of shoes, go back to work, right? So I keep walking, I'm walking. It's getting louder and louder. And I still remember looking to my left, seeing this construction worker. He had a yellow helmet on, an older white guy, had a gray hair, a ponytail, and he looked at me like this. Everybody had this look. You know what that look was? Of being beaten and awestruck and shocked and just so tired looking. I'm walking, and I had my hat down, and it was getting so bright. And I'm here, I mean, louder is because of the construction materials, and I mean, I apologize, the backhoes or whatever equipment that they were using. And I kept walking. I mean, it was like me looking into these lights. It was blinding. and then I just stopped, and I looked up, and I was there. If you could just scroll through. Right there. So what happened is that when I got there, I'm just trying to get my bearings. I was coming from here, and as I walked, I scanned when I was there, I just scanned, and as high as I could see was all devastation the whole way. But what was the only thing standing was that part of the building. I could tell you from that day, 2001, till I retired, 2006, I lived here in Florida till about a good 10 years after that. Every time I saw that, I would just lose my mind, just uncontrollably, because it brought back everything. I'm going to tell you what I saw. I'm going to use my senses. I saw complete, utter devastation as far as you could see. 210, more than all those buildings down there, either collapsed. There were 7 buildings there, collapsed or damaged. Total devastation. Looked like a war. It was a war, which we subsequently learned. What I smelled? I smelled rubber burning. And I smelled, I'm going to say this word twice. If you have people who are in your family who are in whatever, first responder and medical people, ask them, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, have you ever smelled the smell of death? I know Officer Long has done this much work in ME's office, knows the smell of death. Once you smell the smell of death, it's the most nastiest, disgusting thing you've ever experienced in your life. So that's what I smelled. What I heard was constant beeping on their uniform, and I don't know where, but somewhere on their uniform, the firemen, they have something within that when they need help, they activate this if they're not able to perform their duties or incapacitated, right? So all I was hearing, beeping, beeping, beeping. These poor firemen, I think there's 343 of them died that day. They were in there, right? So that's what I saw. So what did I do? O'Sullivan, what did you do for the sake of time? I joined what they call the bucket brigade. I think there's a picture in here. You see all this material that's in here, except for these big beams? This is all gone through by hand. And why was that? Because it's a crime scene, it's evidence. I remember going through the pile, and I looked down, and not to bring religion into it, I saw this shiny object, and I picked it up. It was round, and it was a medallion of the Blessed Mother on it. And on the back was, and forgive me, it was a Hispanic last name. I don't remember if it was Gonzalez or whatever. So I put it in my pocket. Because at the end of the day, what I do, because people were never found. Do you know that this week already, 2 people were identified? Not by that had bodies there, right? By fingerprints, teeth, DNA. Imagine that, 20 years later, 2 people were identified. I brought that back and handed it in because that might have the only thing that family's ever going to get. They're not going to. Most people don't have their bodies of their loved ones to have a proper service for. So I was down there from September 12th, 2001 until March. I tell people, unless you were there on that day and saw the planes go into the building, which I had some family members who were there, and they're alive, thank God, is if you saw that and you saw the buildings collapse and the people making that decision on top of the buildings, how do I want to, imagine this, people, you watch those specials where you see people jumping out the windows. Imagine having them make a decision, which I was talking to Dr. Nanda yesterday. How do I want to die today? Do I want to be burnt to death, or do I want to jump out of an 80th floor building, because by the time I hit the ground, I'm going to be dead anyhow? Not to be sarcastic. Imagine that. How do I want to die today? Right? So this is not something to be taken lightly. These people hate us. They've come back to New York over 20-something times to try to do it again. I pray that it doesn't happen again. It was a horrible experience in my life to go through, but I'm blessed. I am sick. I have 3 certified illnesses that the government pays for. but I'm here every day, or I try to be. I have my bad days where Dr. Iannetti knows, and you might not see me as much. But I come here because I love what I want to do, or what I do. And I love doing this, and I'll end it on this, because they're taping this now. As of today, I would tell you guys, whenever, if you have a hard time in life, which we say, there's plenty of services here to help you with. And I would have previously said, before last year, because I didn't do this because of COVID, is that I am a hypocrite. And I would let that sit into you, because of the fact that I've never spoken to anybody about it. I went for I might run over, I just want to finish, this is very, very important. Back in 2002, they started seeing us 9/11 guys at Mount Sinai Hospital. I went in, I saw a whole bunch of doctors poking and probing me, and then I go in and see this doctor, she's talking to me, and I eventually say, we're talking about Florida, I'm going on vacation to the Keys, and so is she. What kind of doctor are you? She says, I'm a psychiatrist. A wall went up. I'm fine. I was damaged goods until 1 year ago. 1 year ago, I talked to somebody. 19 years. And 1 year ago, after that, after being married from my wife since 1997, I never told my wife about what I experienced. I did. I never had such a bad experience in my life. And as I'm speaking to you now, with my kids who are 20 and 21 years old, I still never talk to them about it. Why? Because I don't think I could. The closest it came to me was when my son was in middle school doing an assignment on 9/11, and I'll end it at this. And he said to me, Daddy, and we're at breakfast on a Saturday morning, he said, were you there on 9/11? And his name's Tommy, and I said, I call him Buddy. I said, yeah, Buddy. And I put my head down, like I was reading the newspaper. He knew what happened. I just lost it. And here's my 12-year-old son had to come over to console me. And know how he's going to hear my story? Is from this. This is being videotaped. So now, as my kids being an adult, I'm going to relive this and go through it with my kids. All I can tell you is that there's going to be none of you were alive at that time. Go home and speak to your parents, watch what happened that day. That one day changed our lives forever. So I just, I know I missed things that during my speech, and I apologize. Why is that? Because I go unscripted. Wherever that pictures come up, it takes me. So I appreciate you coming to see me, and you have a great day. Thank you. That's